Before the cheers came the chains. Before the glory came the silence. And before the sand drank blood, it drank tears. This was not a school. It was a forge. And they didn't train men here. They forged weapons out of flesh. Welcome to the Ludus Magnus, the greatest secret Rome never wanted you to see. In the shadow of the Colosseum, buried beneath the roar of 10,000 voices, there stood a place more sacred than any temple, more feared than any prison. This was the heart of the beast, the Ludus Magnus, the great school of gladiators. Not a stadium, not a battlefield, but a factory of souls. They called them bestiae, beasts, infames, the dishonored. But they were men, men with names, men with mothers, men who once dreamed of harvests, not halos of sand. And every one of them entered this place broken, and left it transformed. Some say they were slaves, others say criminals. But the truth, they were all survivors. And survival has a price. This is not a story of glory. It's a story of what happens when Rome turns pain into spectacle, and what it cost to become immortal. It began not in sport, but in death. In the early days of Rome, when the Republic was still young and hungry, the dead were not just buried, they were honored. And the way Romans honored their ancestors, with blood. At funerals of the great, warriors would duel to the death, a munus, a duty, a gift to the gods, to send the spirit of the departed into the afterlife with honor. But soon, the dead weren't enough. The living wanted more. By 264 BCE, the first munus recorded in history. 3 pairs of gladiators fought at the funeral of Brutus Pera. 3 pairs, 6 men, 6 deaths, and Rome applauded. Entertainment. That word changed everything. The state saw blood as a tool, control, distraction, feed the people bread, and let them feast on violence. So the ludi, the schools, were born. Private training grounds at first, then state-sponsored, then monumental. Ludus Magnus, built by Emperor Domitian, the largest gladiator school in the empire, home to over 200 fighters, guarded by legionnaires, surrounded by walls thick as tombs. It wasn't just a training ground. It was a machine, and every man who entered was raw material. They came from everywhere, captured warriors from Gaul, debtors from Carthage, criminals from the slums of Ostia, even Romans who lost everything. They were stripped, shaved, branded, and then they were given a name, not their own, but one chosen for them. A Thracian fighter, a Samnite, a Retiarius, each with a role, each with a destiny, but none of them chose it. Imagine waking up in a cell, no windows, no sky, just stone, straw, and the stench of fear. You're given a tunic, a wooden sword, and a name you don't recognize. Murmillo, they call you, the fishman, because of the helmet shaped like a fish. But you're not a fish. You're a man, and you're about to learn what it means to be a weapon. This is the sand yard, the crucible, where men are broken and rebuilt. They trained 6 days a week, from dawn to dusk. No rest, no mercy. They fought with rudis, wooden swords, weighted to be heavier than real steel. So when they finally held iron, it felt like air. Pain was the curriculum. Every bruise, every scar, every broken bone was a lesson. They learned to fight left-handed if their right was severed, to dodge a trident, to block a net, to kill without hesitation. But the body was only half the battle. The mind was the real enemy. They were forbidden love, forbidden family, forbidden hope. Yet some still dreamed of a farm, of a wife, of a son who would never know his father was a killer. But dreams don't survive here. Only discipline, only survival. And then there was the diet. They called it gladiatorium sagina, the gladiators' fattening. Barley, beans, ash, and vinegar, high in calcium, low in meat. Why? Because fat protected the organs, and ash made the skin harder. They weren't fed to be strong. They were fed to last longer in the arena. They were known as hordearii, the barley men, less than human, more than slaves. And yet, some found brotherhood. In the darkness, loyalty was the only light. They trained together, bled together, dreamed of freedom together. The wooden sword. If a gladiator fought long enough, won enough fights, proved his value, the soil emperor could grant him the rudis. A wooden sword given in ceremony, symbolizing retirement, freedom. But for every 1,000 who entered, only a handful ever held that sword. And even then, freedom was not always kind. Once a hero of the arena, now a ghost in the streets. Because no matter how many fights you won, you were still infamous. The dishonored, unfit for politics, unfit for marriage, unfit for peace. So the school didn't just train fighters, it created men who could never go home. This was the carceres, the holding cells beneath the Colosseum, the last place a gladiator would ever know as a man. Imagine standing here, hearing the crowd, knowing they're not cheering you. They're cheering for your death or your victory. Either way, they win. And then, you step into the light. They weren't soldiers, but they fought like them, with strategy, with courage, with fear. Every fight was a dance, a deadly ballet. The retiarius light, agile, dodging, casting his net. The secutor heavy, relentless, shield up, sword ready. One mistake, one slip, and the sand drinks deep. Polis verso, the turned thumb. Life or death, decided in a heartbeat. But here's what they don't tell you. Most gladiators didn't die. They were too valuable, trained too long, paid too much. Killing them was like burning gold. So when a fighter fell, the lanistae, the owner, would often intervene. Spare him, because tomorrow he could fight again. They had doctors, surgeons, herbalists. The Medici gladiatoria were some of the best in the empire, because a living gladiator was worth 10 dead ones. But that doesn't mean they didn't suffer. The average gladiator fought 10 to 15 times a year. Survival rate, around 90% per fight. But cumulative risk, by age 30, most were dead or broken, and some were forced to fight beasts. Bestiarii, the beast fighters, often criminals, sent to die for the amusement of Rome. No armor, no real chance, just a spear and a prayer. This was not sport. This was sacrifice, on an altar of sand and stone. And the most horrifying truth, sometimes they made them fight each other. Men who trained together, brothers in the Ludus, forced to kill one another. Loyalty meant nothing here. Only survival, only obedience. And Rome watched and loved every second. We think of them as killers, but they were men, and men feel. Archaeologists found something extraordinary in Ephesus, a gladiator cemetery, and among the graves, a simple inscription. Not by the state, not by the crowd, but by someone, a lover, a friend, a child. They were not monsters. They were trapped, trained to kill, rewarded for violence, denied peace. And the worst part? Some of them started to believe in the glory, because in the arena, for the first time, they were seen. They were someone, not a slave, not a criminal, but a hero, even if it was a lie. Trauma wears many masks. One is pride. They fought not just for freedom, but for identity, for a name that meant something, even if it was built on blood. And when they died as gladiators, not as men, but as legends. By the 5th century, the games ended. Christian emperors banned them. Too bloody, too pagan, too Roman. The last recorded gladiator fight, 404 AD. After a monk, Telemachus, rushed the arena to stop a fight. He was stoned to death by the crowd. And still, the games stopped. The schools closed. The chains were broken. The sand was swept clean. But the ghosts remained. We remember the Colosseum. We marvel at the architecture. We take selfies by the arches. But we forget the men who lived beneath it. who trained in darkness, who died for applause. They didn't vanish. They became myth, memory, silence. It didn't die. It just became memory. Look closely. The gladiator never left. They live in every fighter who trains in pain, in every soldier who fights for a cause not his own, in every athlete who trades his body for fame. The Ludus is now a gym. The lanistae is a coach. The Caesar is a sponsor. And the crowd, still hungry for blood, just streamed in HD. We call it entertainment, progress, sport. But ask yourself, what have we really changed? When we glorify violence, when we reward pain, when we turn trauma into triumph, are we any different than Rome? And what of loyalty, of sacrifice, of the man who fights not for glory, but because he has no choice? What does it mean to be free? Before the chains, there was a man. Before the sand, there was a dream. Before the silence, there was a voice. They didn't want you to know their truth, because truth is heavier than glory. But now you've seen, now you know. If this forgotten hero moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and share his story. Because history isn't just dates and emperors. It's the ones they tried to erase. And as always, may history never be forgotten.